We've been told for decades that Microsoft Windows is unavoidable, that without big tech operating systems, modern society simply stops working. France proved that is a lie. One of the world's most powerful nations removed Microsoft from its national police force. Tens of thousands of computers, no Windows, no licenses, no dependency on Silicon Valley. Instead, they switched to free open-source software, and the result stunned even government officials. Costs dropped by 40%. This wasn't a small experiment, it was a mass corporate eviction, and it exposed something big tech never expected. Europe may have found a way out of the monopoly. Chapter 1. The 40% Guillotine. The Gendarmerie Nationale is not some small office experiment. It is part of the two pillars of French law enforcement. So when France began removing windows across the entire department, people noticed. Today, more than 103,000 of those machines now run a custom Linux build. That's 97% of the entire desktop fleet. The remaining 3% are on specialized terminals tied to old legacy contracts. As those contracts expire, the last Windows machines disappear with them. The new Gendarmerie machines ship with no operating system at all. No OEM Windows license sits in the purchase price. No automatic activation handshake reaches Redmond. The hardware arrives completely bare. From there, the French government IT teams build the machines themselves and then send it out to officers in the field. That means there is no Microsoft tax linked to the machines. Every workstation now represents a single deliberate decision, and that decision gets repeated numerous times across the fleet. Each one quietly removes a US software vendor from the cost base of a national institution. Individually, it feels small, almost invisible, but at this scale it adds up fast. The clean was just as careful. Specialized apps got rewritten to run on the new computers. IT teams ran parallel deployments to ensure downtime stayed at zero during the switch. The interface stayed familiar on purpose, matching what the officers had used for years. The learning curve never became an excuse to slow things down. One line item, one decision, had just saved millions. $2.2 million gets cut from the licensing budget every single year. That fee used to come out of the French taxpayer wallets, straight into Microsoft's profit column, year after year with no foreseeable end date. Except that changed. The running total got pulled from one of the most reliable revenue streams in Europe. Procurement officers inside the force describe it as a structural cut. Despite Microsoft's desperate attempts at negotiating, the only option was walking away. A 40% drop in total cost of ownership is the number that really matters. This covers everything from licensing and support contracts to training and the costs of running US software inside government walls. The force runs cheaper now, and the vendor sits entirely outside of the chain. Internal reports point to no real performance hit, no measurable downtime, and zero productivity drop. In some cases, the numbers actually improved. And Microsoft? They saw a recurring revenue stream from one of Europe's most security-sensitive institutions evaporate. No last-minute discount package showed up. No senior account manager flew in from Seattle. By the time the eviction was visible from the outside, the internal teams already owned the operating system. They owned the patch pipeline. They owned the deployment toolchain end-to-end. That makes the exit structural rather than cyclical. Even if a future French administration wanted to walk it back, the institutional muscle now lives entirely inside the gendarmerie. Every dollar that used to fund Silicon Valley shareholder returns now stays inside French borders. The lesson Microsoft seems to have absorbed is uncomfortable. France did not ask for a better deal, and that was the whole problem. But money turned out to be only half of the story. Chapter 2. The Telemetry Black Hole. The bigger reason was a data hemorrhage that almost nobody talks about openly. Modern Windows includes built-in telemetry that collects device diagnostics, crash reports, and app usage data, which can then be sent back to Microsoft servers. It's mainly used for stability and security. Microsoft documents these systems in its privacy materials, and parts of the data flow attract a lot of attention. A portion of this telemetry is baked into the operating system, and while users can reduce what's shared, it can't fully be disabled in standard configurations. You aren't crazy for feeling like your computer's spying on you and forcing upgrades. It is a documented business model. For everyday users, it's mostly just background noise, but for organizations handling sensitive data, it can be seen as something closer to a live intelligence breach. Their working assumption is that any data leaving the device is no longer under government control. Even if content never leaves the box, the metadata trail and the activity patterns do, and that can be enough. It can reveal operational frequency, investigative priorities, and the details of sensitive operations. Put all of that together across 103,000 endpoints, and you end up with a continuously updating picture of how a G7 nation polices itself, all refreshing in real time. Once the data leaves the national infrastructure, recall is effectively impossible. It gets worse. A U.S. law quietly overrides France's own. The Cloud Act, passed in 2018, gives American authorities legal mechanisms to force U.S.-based cloud providers to hand over server data on demand. The physical location of those servers anywhere in the world doesn't change that. For French intelligence services, this isn't a hypothetical concern. It is written law in another country that overrides their own. No vendor relationship or contract clause can amend it. Plugging that corporate data leak was the second motive behind the migration. The custom Linux build used by the Gendarmerie doesn't automatically send usage or diagnostic information out to outside companies. Any diagnostics, logs, or crash information is kept inside national infrastructure run by the French government engineers. The idea is simple. No operational data leaves the country, and audit checks are used to confirm that. That kind of enforcement has shifted how these systems are viewed. Suspicion of your own workstation is no longer a fringe concern held by privacy specialists. It's becoming a working assumption behind European digital policy in 2026. Public sector procurement contracts across the continent are starting to reflect that. Chapter 3: The Hardware Rescue. Microsoft's most profitable trick has a fairly clinical name: forced hardware obsolescence. Windows 11 ships with a hardware compatibility wall built directly into its installation requirements. Machines need a Trusted Platform Module 2.0 chip. They need a specific generation of approved CPU, a minimum amount of RAM, and secure boot capability. Computers that fail any single check get blocked from upgrading. The deadline that turned this into a global issue was Windows 10 reaching end of support in October 2025. At that point, hundreds of millions of fully functioning machines around the world were effectively pushed toward replacement or upgrade. Not because the hardware had failed, but because one vendor's product roadmap had moved on according to a schedule set in Redmond, Washington. The bill ran into the hundreds of billions of dollars and thousands of tons of electronic waste. Working desktops and fully capable laptops were suddenly destined for the landfill or fire sale liquidation. Corporate IT departments, school districts, hospital networks, and city governments all faced the same uncomfortable choice: keep running unsupported software with mounting security risks, or write huge capital expenditure checks for new hardware. The refresh cycle stopped being a technical question and turned into a budget event. But France bypassed the upgrade cycle entirely. The custom Linux build doesn't impose strict hardware cutoffs. That's why older equipment is still treated as a fully usable police terminal. Under a different software roadmap, the same machine might already be marked for replacement and written off. Over time, that decision reduces replacement costs, and the savings build up each year. Existing machines stay in use longer instead of being replaced on a fixed schedule every 5 to 7 years. The money that would have gone into new equipment is instead retained in the public budget and redirected toward things like staffing, training, and field operations. And that brings the 40% savings back into focus. It was never just about licensing. That cost is only the most visible part. The less obvious expenses come from the cycle around it: constant hardware refreshes, procurement contracts, retraining users, managing disposal and depreciation schedules. Over time, those pieces lock governments into upgrade timelines, whether they need them or not. The environmental impact follows from that, even if it wasn't the primary goal. Fewer replacements mean fewer transport emissions and less electronic waste. France didn't adopt the approach from environmental messaging, but reduced turnover naturally lowers the footprint. Look closely and the e-waste cycle starts to look like a sales tactic. The compatibility rules are part of what keeps the cycle going. In practice, they tend to encourage regular upgrades to newer hardware on Microsoft's schedule. The way around that isn't theoretical or confined to planning documents. It's already being done inside a major G7 country's police force using systems that run on equipment Microsoft no longer officially supports. Now other countries are noticing. Chapter 4: The Sovereign Contagion. Schleswig-Holstein is the most northern state in Germany. On paper, it's a pretty quiet place to kick off a software revolt. That's part of the reason most people outside of the tech press missed it. The state just kicked off the biggest Microsoft eviction Germany has ever seen. They're going after 30,000 government computers used by civil servants, judges, and state police. The plan is to rip out the whole Microsoft setup. What goes in its place is a stack of open Linux tools. LibreOffice handles the office work, open source email and calendar systems take the rest. Their Nextcloud platforms run on servers that sit inside Germany itself. The state's Digital Affairs Ministry called the project a long-term safety net, a way to dodge future licensing fights and head off future data leaks, a way to stay ahead of European data protection law. Migrating tens of thousands of users is not cheap. The state parliament allocated roughly 30 million euros to cover the grueling multi-year transition. But once it's complete, the state expects to save 16.5 million euros a year on licensing. That's money that's going back into the budget rather than into Microsoft's European books. The rollout is structured in waves. The first covers general administrative workstations, the second focuses on specialized regional departments, and the third extends to more complex municipal systems. Each phase includes a 90-day stabilization period, during which issues are logged and engineers refine the deployment image before moving on to the next group. The political durability is what makes the project strategically important. In places like Schleswig-Holstein, the shift has been framed less as a short-term initiative and more as a long-term digital independence. Future governments could, in theory, change direction, but doing so would mean reintroducing significant recurring costs and rebuilding systems already integrated into day-to-day operations. The pattern these two cases set up is getting harder to argue with. A nuclear-armed G7 country runs its top police force without Windows. A German state with 30,000 government computers follows the exact same path. The corporate excuse used to be that no real alternative existed. That excuse has just about collapsed. But the lost license money isn't what scares big tech. It's the idea every Silicon Valley sales pitch is built on, that there is no real alternative. And once that crack shows up in public, backed by hard numbers, the power dynamic flips. Every American software company feels it. A French ministry sitting across from a Microsoft rep in 2026 already has internal numbers in hand. Those numbers show exactly what life looks like without the contract. They have proof they can run the whole operation without the product. Negotiation dynamics flip overnight. The vendor used to dictate the terms while the customer asked for discounts. Now the customer arrives with a roadmap to leave. Pricing power moves across the table. The knock-on effects of European software is already showing up. European companies that sell office software say their government calls have jumped sharply. Same goes for the teams behind chat tools and login systems. Open source groups that build free office software are getting real funding now. That money comes from ministries that used to give them nothing. European cloud companies are winning deals across the board. Those same deals would have gone straight to American giants 2 years ago. The money France and Schleswig-Holstein pulled out of Microsoft isn't just sitting in a bank, it's getting plowed back into European tech firms who until recently couldn't even get a seat at the table. Now other European capitals are watching closely. The Netherlands, Italy, Spain, they're all looking to review their current system. The pattern keeps spreading. Each one adds another data point to the curve. This eventually matters for your laptop too. The personal scale lesson hidden inside the operation is straightforward enough. The same open-source software that runs a national police force is freely available. Anyone with a laptop in an afternoon could install it. The same telemetry resistance that protects French intelligence operations protects an ordinary household. The hardware lifecycle extension that saved France hundreds of millions saves a single user the cost of a brand new computer. The blueprint scales down as cleanly as it scales up. Pull all this together and the full shape of what France pulled off becomes visible. A financial play, a security operation, a hardware policy, all executed at once through a single procurement decision. The 40% cost reduction is the headline number. Underneath it sit other gains, intelligence integrity, extended hardware life, budget redirection. The whole move keeps reinforcing itself across multiple political cycles. The era of unavoidable software monopolies is cracking. France broke the corporate lock-in on a national scale. Every other European capital can copy it. The excuse for paying the Microsoft tax is gone. It shows that Silicon Valley's nightmare isn't a competitor, it is you, realizing you don't need them at all. But the real story isn't just in the announcements, it's in the systems quietly being rewritten underneath them. And once you start following that thread, you end up asking different questions about what Windows has become. France moving off Windows wasn't just a procurement choice, it showed what changes when you stop depending on it at scale. And once you see that shift, Microsoft products start to look a little different. Find out in Something is Very Wrong with Microsoft Windows 11, or watch this video instead.